So before we introduce you and everything, hello, welcome to the second season of the Fisher Protocol, a show where we're saying the Who is the greatest band of all time is not subjective, but everything else is. Please take a quick second to like, subscribe, and share with your Who-minded friends. The Who is a passion of ours. This is more of a personal journey, and no money is made from these videos, so liking and subscribing lets us know we are not alone in Who land. Constructive feedback is always welcome in the comments below. I spout Who-related content on Twitter at Fisher Protocol. I am Ethan. I'm being joined today by my best Who friend, Tom. We do not claim to be Who experts, just two guys who like to talk about the greatest rock and roll band of all time, The Who. Welcome to the Fisher Protocol Season 2. Officially, we did take a hiatus. We came back because it was the 50th anniversary of Who's Next, which we had not covered before. We felt it was time. So before we get to our guest, growing up, finding The Who in 1989, as I did, I never thought I'd see the band again. This story has been told many times on this show. But I did get to see them in 1996. And oh boy, what a happy day, Madison Square Garden, 1996. And around that time, I was buying everything Who related. I was getting all the bootlegs, no matter how shady the bootlegger trade was at the time. And I picked up what I consider one of my tomes, The Who Concert File. I have had this book since the day it came out. It is yellowed. It has the appropriate marks and yellowing all over it. You can see. And the names pop out at me. They say Joe McMichael and Irish Jack Lyons. We all know who Irish Jack is. Hopefully, if you don't know who Irish Jack is, I'm sorry, this is not the show for you. But a couple months ago, I was Facebook gives you that algorithm that said people you might know, and this name Joe McMichael came up, and I was like, I know that name. That name has been in some form of every house I've lived in since 1996 in the Who Concert File, and it was not through my regular Who algorithm; it was through my personal. So every once in a while, I get up my guff and I ask the person if they are that person. I said, "Hey, are you Joe McMichael who wrote the Who Concert Guide?" And I was quickly corrected. It's the Who Concert File, and yes, it's me. And I got starstruck, as I do. And that's who we have with us today, the co-author of the Who Concert File, Joe McMichael. Hey, Joe.
Hi, how you guys doing?
Good, man.
Good. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that long intro. We're just kind of excited here. I hopped up on Goofballs to ask you some questions, but
glad to.
Just want to let you know how much I enjoyed this book back then. I took a look through it. I was not able to read the whole thing again. It's not a book per se, it's like a reference guide, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
well, thank you.
Before we too much get into it, give us a little bit of your history and your history, maybe discovering the band that we all love so much.
It's ironic because I'm sure you're familiar with Mark Starr. He's always posting photos. And just the other day, he posted photos. He said, 52 years ago today, The Who played the Kinetic Playground in Chicago. And that was the first time I saw them. This is Halloween of 1969. And he posted pictures. And it was literally like going right back to where I was sitting on the floor of the Kinetic Playground, which was just a psychedelic ballroom. And you're sitting there sort of Indian style on the floor. And it just brought back the memory of seeing them and being overwhelmed at how powerful they were. And when I talk to people about the Who, I always say, it wasn't about the power of the PA, how many watts it was, or Pete was using high watt stacks, so was John. It's not about that. It's how they played, the passion that they played with, the power that they played with. And that's what overwhelmed me. Of course, they were powerful as far as wattage was concerned, because that was Friday night, 1969, Halloween. And my ears were still ringing when I went to school Monday. I was in high school at the time. And the ticket was only $5. It always was at the Kinetic Playground, which was North Clark Street in Chicago. And it was always three bands on the bill. The opening act was a band called Liverpool Scene, which was kind of like maybe a bit like the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, then the Kinks, and then the Who. So that was well worth $5, I would say.
I mean, yeah. Now that you're talking about, I was trying to find it in the concert file. You said it was Halloween, basically.
Yes, it was.
Oh man, and I don't know why I like to do these things right when people are here. Kinetic Playground, Chicago, Illinois. The Who put on a magnificent show, playing well over 2 hours, supported by the Kinks and the Liverpool scene, which you just said, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Amazing, and they always wanted to open. Did they headline the show? Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I guess my thing is it's they're opening for the show that their hit single is kind of a mime off of. I can't explain, right?
It was, yes,
Yeah.
very much influenced by the Kinks on that one.
Right. So after that was this was the night, famously, our young friend here, Tom, got infected at the 2001 concert for the concert for New York. I famously got infected when I was 10 years old and that Tommy Universal Studios 1989 show.
Oh yeah, it was on video, right?
Yeah. That's what
I was at that show.
I'll have to ask you about that later. I don't know if I have questions. It's so in my mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the biggest thing about our show is everybody has different entry points, so they have to understand where they're coming from.
Of course, yeah, right.
Just an example, me and Tom really like Endless Wire and Who, and we get smack talk to us sometimes because people really like It's Hard and what's the other one? Face Dances. So anyway, that's not the point. After you saw, I'm sure this was a Tommy show, yeah?
Correct.
And was that it for you? Were you done? Or was it like you had to see them?
Yeah, it was instantaneous. And it probably sounds cliched or maybe melodramatic. I said I was a different person when I walked out of that show than when I walked in. And very few concerts can do that to you. Oh, you go see a band and, oh, it was very entertaining. Oh, it was great to be at that show. And 6 months later, people are saying the same thing about some other show. No, when I saw The Who, it became, there's no band in the world like that. None.
And
no question.
And mine was over a VHS cassette and his was on video. So we can only imagine it being live and with Keith Moon and it being Tommy in this tour we've heard so much about. And this tour that I constantly drag my stepmother over the coals because she decided not to go out that night when she was offered a ticket, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah. And this was before Woodstock came out, the movie.
Right.
Because this is before, or the same year Woodstock, but later. So
I usually tell people, I said, the first time I saw The Who, they looked like Woodstock and they sounded like Live at Leeds. So okay. I said, if you put those two together, that's what I saw and that's what I heard.
True. And did you come an avid follower and
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have a cousin who's an avid Who fan as well. He's 10 years younger than I am. And he said, he goes, yeah, when I was in high school, my friends would tell me, shut up about The Who, will you? We're tired of hearing about it. And I said, my friends said the exact same things to me. And then when Live at Leeds came out in May of 70, I said, okay, this is what I saw. And then their mouths dropped, their jaws dropped open. And they realized what I was talking about.
There's a huge difference just between everything you had heard prior to Live at Leeds, and then when you hear Live at Leeds, it's just a different world. Like,
oh yeah.
When you hear Tommy the album and it's got all the acoustic guitar and this and that, and then all of a sudden it's Live at Leeds, they're like, is this the same band?
Yeah, right. Well, and that's an interesting point, because I think you can go to a concert, the audience can go to the show, and so can obviously the band is there, whatever band it is, and say, what's a great show? Well, for a band like The Who, it's completely different than their recordings. The studio versions are one thing, live is a different animal. You get a band like, let's say the Eagles. To them, a great show is if we can replicate everything we did in the studio exactly the same on stage. So, there's those two schools of thought. One's not wrong and the other one's not right. It's horses for courses, as the British say.
Yeah.
But, yeah, you're right.
So you just followed the Who, got infected, and you just have been a lifelong guy since then.
Correct.
So how do you get involved in doing this book? I mean, what's the thought process behind it?
Oh, okay. Well, initially, I was just collecting everything I could on them, and it was a pretty stark world compared to today's landscape. I had a subscription to Downbeat magazine in 1970, and lo and behold, they're on the cover. I think it was from May or June of 1970, if you ever want to look it up. There were very few books about the Who.
What's it called? What was it called?
Downbeat magazine, primarily a jazz magazine.
Okay.
But they did an article about the Who, a good interview with Pete. I think it was from Cleveland, which would have been right around the time I saw them, November '69. And then we also had a subscription at my house to National Geographic. And in the August 1970 issue, there was an article about the Berkshire counties of Western Massachusetts. And there was a picture of the Who playing live at Tanglewood, which was the home of the Boston Pops Orchestra with Arthur Fiedler conducting. And there was a picture of them playing there, I think it was 2 days before Woodstock. And it said the Who entertained 6,000 on the lawn of a place called the Music Shed. And I collected those sorts of things. And then to get to writing the book, I always thought, well, somebody should catalog what they did, record what they did, document what they did. And then by 1987, Mark Lewison had come out with a book, The Beatles Live. And then he did the sessions, and then they combined them into The Beatles Complete Chronicle. And I thought, well, the Who deserve a book like that too. So all through, basically from about the mid 80s onwards, I was trying to collect information about the Who, buying magazines, old New Musical Express, Melody Maker, whatever. Trips I made to London, I would buy old mags and get the dates and stuff. So then I just thought, well, if the Beatles deserve a book on their history, accounting for their career, I said, well, so do the Who. And that's where I really started work in earnest.
I just looked through this book, which is I don't know if it's a legal book.
I have that.
Yeah, I didn't see the Downbeat. Then again, maybe I need to look closer. It might be in there. So you basically were writing this book for years and years and years before you were writing the book. I was
kind of into, a book came out in 1973 by Mark Stein, who later did the Kids All Right film. And he did a book of photography, and he took pictures at Saratoga Performing Arts Center, the 2nd of August, 1971, the first part of the Who's Next tour. Yeah. And then he took pictures in December 2nd, 1971 at Dallas Memorial Auditorium, the second part of the Who's Next tour. And when I looked at that and I said, okay, my brother saw the Who in 1971. I missed them because I simply had just come back from vacation and didn't have a dime. So I missed them on the Who's Next tour. My brother saw them and I said, okay, well, those are those dates. So even in that, I was intrigued with where did they play? So I said, okay, August 2nd, they played Saratoga. I knew that they had played New York, the 29th and 31st of July. So there he started to build the dates, fill in all the dates in between. And Jeff Stein was, part of that too, because I saw definite dates from two different parts of two different times during the year.
But what were you doing professionally at this time? Because I feel like this right now is it's kind of like it sounds like it's a hobby you're doing that one day you're going to be able to do a book.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a sideline to my regular job, my day job, which I used to work out on the flight line, first at O'Hare, And then I moved to Los Angeles for 20 years and worked at LAX. Not where United Airlines or any of that was going on. I worked on the private side, private aviation, charter jets, corporate jets, and all that. So I was out on the flight line, refueling airplanes, directing them in and all that. Saw a lot of musicians too, but I never saw the Who out on the flight line.
Oh, okay. Right on.
Met some other bands, but not them.
So like before we get into the Irish Jack of it all, hold on, let me pause the recording for 1 second. Okay, I forgot I was going to ask you. But through all this, you're going to shows. Are you basically going through? And is this all in the Chicago area?
Yeah, I lived in all my life up until 1979, and then I moved to Los Angeles. I think, ironically, it was November 1st is when I started my job out there. So right around this time of year, and then I lived there until 2000.
And same kind of job?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Nicer weather.
Right. Sure. And that takes you up to what year?
That took me up until 2000.
Okay.
And then my girlfriend and I moved to outside Atlanta for a couple of years. And then eventually I ended up back here, which is where I'm from. But of course, all those years I was still doing research, particularly while I lived in Los Angeles, because I bought a card which was called Friends of the UCLA Library. So I was able to go to UCLA on weekends and evenings and stuff and research Melody Maker magazine, because UCLA had a run of Melody Maker going all the way back to the 50s. So you could research every single week, especially in the Who's formative years. And you would see the high numbers listed and et cetera. Not the detours, but the high numbers and then the Who.
Go ahead.
What kind of information are you looking at the library? Is it just old clippings or?
Yeah, in those days it was newspapers.
Okay.
It was all on microfilm, so it was on reels. So it was nothing digital.
Right.
And so I would go to the music library to look up Melody Maker. And then the regular library had a run of underground newspapers, out-of-town newspapers, all sorts of stuff.
Huh.
And then in those days, you would do what you would call an ILL, an interlibrary loan. So let's say I was trying to find out when the Who played in Baltimore, for example. And you would write to the whatever branch of the local library, request the form for the microfilm. They would physically send the film to Los Angeles. I would have 2 weeks to read it. Of course, you had to pay for it. It was $1.75 or $2, whatever it was. And then you could review the film at your local library, and then they would send it back. So that was, $2 or $3 here and there, and researching from libraries all over the country. When I was on vacation, ironically, I would also spend a lot of time at libraries, which is not normally what people do. But I was in Washington, D.C. a couple of times, and I went to the Library of Congress for 2 days to look up stuff.
That's too cool. Huh.
But
it was kind of the hard way in those days, non-digital,
Oh yeah. No, that's what makes it even more impressive, is just not having, the access that we do now. Because I mean, I wouldn't know how to do it.
It was a learning experience. I was learning as I went along, and ironically, a good friend of mine wrote an excellent book on the Kinks, and he was doing the same thing at the same time.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Hey Joe, we lost your video. Can you stop it and start it or something?
I still have it.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm not seeing it.
Oh, okay. Okay. It just came back.
Okay, it came back.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So, but this whole time you're doing all this research, you don't really have a deal to do a book art, do you? Or
no, that came much later. I was, of course, researching, and in those days, the book was on notepads and legal tablets, and then clippings. You would make copies of wet copies from microfilm. So I had a whole library of that stuff on a bookshelf. Took up a whole bookshelf. but I didn't have anything in mind as far as publishing was concerned. I didn't know how to go about that because I'd never written anything like this before. So a friend of mine who is British lived in Burbank, California, across town from me. And I was just about ready to end all the research, conclude all the research. And I called him one day and I said, well, he goes, you know what we should do is design a letterhead, make it more professional so you could submit the idea of the book to people, to different publishers. And I thought, good idea. So we were going to go to lunch one day and discuss the letterhead and et cetera, et cetera. And I was expecting to get a stack of rejection letters. And as fate would have it, that same morning, I'm having coffee and I get a call. It's my friend, Chris Charlesworth, who was the publisher, calling me from London. Well, there's an 8-hour time difference between Los Angeles and London.
Well, hold on a
So
second.
anyway-
Hold on a second. I hate to interrupt you, but you say it's your friend Chris Charlesworth. Chris Charlesworth is not an unknown name to the Who community.
Oh, right, exactly.
In any way.
Yeah.
Really explain who he is, just in a couple sentences, if you can.
Well, he was a staff writer for Melody Maker.
Yeah.
And the English phrase is he was our man in America. He was stationed in New York for a while, and then he lived in LA for a while. So he interviewed just about everybody you could think of, reviewed lots and lots of shows.
Okay.
So he said, I was always a big fan of the Who, even long before I was ever paid to write about them. He used to go see them when he was in college.
Right.
And then he saw them a few times. I think when he was 3 or 4 times when he was in school, maybe more. I'm not exactly sure on that. And then he became a staff writer at Melody Maker. And then he was the correspondent in America. And then he eventually got back to London. And he was working for Omnibus Press at the time, published a lot of great rock books. So anyway, he calls me that morning. He goes, I'm just about ready to leave the office. And I'm having morning coffee because of the 8-hour time difference. And he goes, I just got out of a meeting with my boss. He said, can we commission a book about the Who? And he goes, it's already been written. And I almost fell off the couch. I was flabbergasted. So he says, if you would accept that, we'll send contracts and we'll sign and get it going. So he did. And obviously the rest is Who history, I guess.
Well, I mean, there's so much more in the book than just that. First of all the years it took for you to do that, you probably would have been doing it whether you thought you were going to do a book or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But how does Irish Jack enter into the picture?
Right around the time you discovered the 89 Who, that year's tour. Yeah. Some Who fans, and there was a community of people. In those days, we actually had to write letters back and forth or call. Some friends suggested you should get in touch with Irish Jack. And I said, yes, I'm familiar with his name, but I had never met him or never been in touch with him. So I wrote him and he wrote back and said, he goes, oh, this is a great idea. He goes, who would have ever thought? And of course, he still knows the band very well and goes back to the days of the Detours. So we agreed to write a book on them. And I said, this is what we're going to do. This is what I've got so far. He said, well, this sounds great. He goes, I'll take care of Europe and England. You can take care of America and Australia as far as research was concerned. So we kind of divided the territory.
And how did you feel about that? Like, splitting the book, even with such a Who luminary as Irish Jack, has got to be exciting, I would think, more than anything.
Yeah, it was exciting because he goes back so far with them. And of course, I asked him a million questions when we finally met in London and then later on in New York. But it was exciting. And I felt like it had taken it to another step. It kind of, was progress more than I could have foreseen before then, because I just thought, I'm just a guy working on this research. He had personal connection with them. So if I had a real question, he also said that John was the memory man of the band. John was the one who remembered everything. And of course, at this late date, I wish I could have asked him a million more questions, about a particular show on a particular tour or what have you,
Right on. I get, Tom, do you have a question?
I was just going to say, I think this sounds weird, but it's like Irish Jack.
Tom, you died out. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, you cut out.
You cut out, buddy. Hey, Tom. He can't hear us.
Yeah, his audio is up.
Yeah, this is why I don't go right on YouTube. You cut out. We didn't hear any of your question, Tom.
Oh, perfect. I was just gonna say having Irish Jack's name on the book really does, it kind of gives a little bit of a stamp of validity that you know what I mean? He was in the inner circle.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, for so long. And that's no disrespect to you in the work that you've done. It's just,
oh no, that's fine.
It definitely adds a little weight behind it. Like, yeah, this is a real deal.
It does.
Yeah.
In those days I had a fax machine, and Jack, because of his close personal contact with Pete, and Roger and John at the time, I got a fax. He goes, oh yeah, Pete's agreed to write the foreword. We hadn't even gone to print yet, and Pete agreed to write the foreword. That would not have been possible had Jack not been involved.
Yeah. So did you have to get permission from the band to do this, or did you?
No, not at all.
Anything? No.
It was, we were conducting it independently. Well, I was at first. I guess all told, you could say maybe 10 years of research. But Pete thought it was a strange idea. Why would anyone want to go back and trace all of our gigs and our history? I guess, because they're more concerned with now and tomorrow than they were with what they did in 1966 or something. But it's just, I had this conviction that they should have a book on what they did, because they toured all the time. They were a very hardworking band. I don't know how they did it personally. I don't know how they kept up that energy for all those years.
I think one of them died, is what I think what happened.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I get all excited sometimes if I'm on the internet and I'll reach out to someone, even though I wouldn't normally ever do it. It usually happens in the first couple hours of coffee day.
Uh-huh.
And I saw Irish Jack, so I reached out to him to ask him, tell him I was interviewing you. And I said, I know you're a busy man, but if you have any stories, I'd like to hear one. And he wrote me a fairly long email. He asked me to read it.
Oh, cool.
Good, cool. So if you guys are ready for that.
I am.
With the whistle.
Mm-hmm.
After a few weeks, hi, Ethan. After a few weeks of writing letters to the many local newspapers around Britain in search of Who performance dates from the very early days, I soon realized that newspaper editors have very little time to go researching in the archives for hidden treasure. One editor wrote me suggesting I contact the local library close to that particular newspaper's areas and explain that if any local libraries have far more time for research. And he was right. I quickly discovered that the local libraries I contacted were extremely helpful and patient, and I never looked back after that. In August 1991, I wrote the local library attached to a place called Morecambe. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Morecambe in the west of England. Within a week, they sent me the required advertisement advertising the Who's appearance at the Morecambe Central Pier on Friday, January 6, 1967. What usually happens is the library would send an A4 sized photocopy of the advertisement, which I would be delighted with. When I took out the sheet of A4 for this gig, I discovered that the Morecambe Library had also sent a photocopy of a page of the Morecambe Visitor newspaper in A3 form, which is a smaller size, I assume. I only needed the A4. I was about to tear it up from the bin. By absolute chance, on the lower part of the A3 was the following: Who's Who, a local beat group guitarist, Mike Dickinson, lives in Galgate. Had a night to remember on Friday when he stepped in the last minute to play lead guitar for the chart-topping group The Who at the Central Pier. One of the group, Pete Townsend, was involved in an accident on the M6 motorway and was unable to reach Morecambe, so the rest of The Who approached the Doodlebugs, a local group appearing on the same bill, and asked if they could borrow Mike. I was absolutely, I assume you remember this.
Yeah.
I was absolutely amazed by this discovery. A couple months earlier, Pete Townsend told me he could meet me on his barge in Twickenham. I hope I pronounced that right. Twickenham on information for the book. Quote, Pete, Jack, I've canceled a couple of things for this, and unfortunately can't give you more than an hour. That was the written note awaiting me when I called at Eel Pie office. We went on the barge and we hugged after catching up with family stuff, and it was time to get down to feverishly writing notes. 1 hour went by, then two. After 3 hours of putting away my notes and chatting, do you remember that mod in the Goldhawk? I came away exhausted. Not once had Pete mentioned that a guy called Mike Dickinson from the local band, the Doodlebugs, had stood in for him. I did a bit of detective work and contacted Mike Dickinson. He couldn't believe I was looking for him. He said he would take the memory of filling in for, he said he believed he would take the memory of filling in for 3 or 4 numbers of Pete Townsend of The Who to the grave. Best wishes, Irish Jack.
Yeah. Morecambe, I remember that. Yeah, they pronounced Morecambe. But that was an interesting thing because I was under the impression for some reason that Pete never missed a gig, but in that case, he at least missed, part of it anyway.
All right. So can you guys hear me and see this?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you see what I've shared?
Yes.
These are the visuals he sent along with me and he wanted me to share with you.
I remember that clip.
Yep. And this one.
Oh, yeah. I even recognize Jack's handwriting. Morecambe Central Pier was a place where a lot of bands played.
Oh, right there. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And the last one, which is my favorite, of course.
Yeah.
I don't know how these things work, but.
Yeah, I was.
That's too cool.
I was really flabbergasted when he wrote that. May 13th, May 1996. Yeah, I was really, really, really flabbergasted to see that.
Huh.
And that's weird because that's like a month. That month or the month later was the first time I ever saw them. I saw them in Madison Square Garden, 1996, Quadrophenia.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And I was so excited. I never thought they were getting together ever again. Oh my God.
Yeah. There was it was a little dicey there for a while. Are they going to play and aren't they going to play? And of course, a whole nother subject was John's financial situation. So I think sometimes they were willing to help him out.
But speaking of John, I want to get back to, we took this long sojourn into Irish Jack land, which was great. And thank you again, Jack, for getting back to me. I got so excited. I screamed at my wife, Irish Jack just emailed me, and she looked like I was crazy. I was like, and he seems like a very amiable fellow, right?
Yeah.
Did you guys ever, well, let me get back to John. You said you did interview John.
I did.
Yeah. And just tell us about that a little bit.
Back in 77, 78, 79, right around there, into the 80s, there was a Who fanzine called Who's News, run by Jerry Hauser, really devoted Who fan, who's sadly no longer with us, but he was a really, really big Who fan. And he said, when he realized that I lived in LA, we were in touch, I think either by phone or writing or both. And he said, hey, would you want to do any work as a correspondent for Who's News? Because you live in LA. He goes, they're out there a lot. I said, oh, sure. So in early 1980, I had only been living in LA for about 3 months. I knew John was in town because he was going to start recording. I think it was Too Late to Hero, it became, at a studio up in Hollywood. So I tried to get a hold of him about a week or 10 days went by, no luck. Long story short, Jerry calls me and says, hang on to your hat. He goes, Townsend's out there too. I said, oh. So he goes, but be careful. If Pete doesn't want to be contacted, he'll make sure that he's not contacted, understandable. So I found out that he was staying at the L'Ermitage Hotel, a real European style 5-star hotel in Hollywood. And I left a message and he got back to me eventually. Sorry, this is a little spin-off, but he got back to me eventually and was able to watch him record some demos at Warner Brothers recording studio because the Who had just signed to Warner Brothers. And then fast forward about 6 months. No, wait a minute. I'm getting confused. 1981, Jerry says, "Hey, would you be willing to interview John?" I said, "Does the sun shine?" "Yeah, of course." So again, he was staying at the L'Ermitage. This is August of 1981. So I called him, and he was, "Hello." He was a real sing-songy voice and all that. And then he said, he goes, "Yeah, some people from Who's News said you're supposed to interview me." I said, "If that's agreeable to you." He goes, "Oh, sure." So we contacted each other on the phone about 3 or 4 times, talking about his bass collection and other stuff. And then I went to go interview him on the 26th of August, 1981, which is ironic because the 26th of August, the best I can figure, is when I bought my first bass guitar, which I still have, a Rickenbacker 4001.
Nice.
And I thought it was ironic that they were exactly 10 years apart.
Nice. Yeah.
So, John was very nice. Too Late to Hero had just come out. He was on a promotional tour. He talked about it. We talked a lot about the Who history. And I said, the first time I saw the Who, you were playing a Telecaster bass. And he goes, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Are you sure it wasn't a Precision?" I said, "Slab body Precision like he had in 66? No, that had a black pickguard. It was a Telecaster bass. It was completely white or natural with a white pickguard." And then, like I said, our good friend Mark Starr just posted pictures of it the other day, and there it was. And that stood out in my memory. But he was very nice. He let me play 2 of his bass guitars, an Alembic 8-string and an RD Artist bass. And it was just, of course, 4 hours went by in no time at all. So, it was just one of those lifetime experiences.
I had a chance, not really to meet John, really, but I went to go see him at the Black Cat. It was in 1998, 1999 in Washington, D.C. And I was just such a nervous little child. I just went up and, with shaky hands, and asked him if he would sign my "Smash Your Head Against the Wall." There was
wow.
There was
very nice.
No contact, no nothing. He signed it for me, and I walked away all shaky hand, and it was, it was amazing. It was an amazing show. It was an amazing show.
His club shows were pretty loud, I remember.
And they were not very full, and so we got the full loudness, and I wasn't expecting like 98% Who material, but that's what I got. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I got to hear 905 live, which is just such a thrill for me.
Yeah, that is one thing about his solo tours, or Pete, of course, is that you're seeing material that you wish that the Who would have played, and they did 905 briefly in 79, I think it was, but then dropped it pretty quickly. I guess they didn't like the 8-string. Roger didn't like the 8-string. He thought it was too loud.
Are you talking about Success Story or 905? You're talking about 905?
905.
Okay, well, I'll have to find. I've never heard that before.
Jerry Hauser, real noted Who fan. I think he and some other people in the Who network at the time went to all 5 Garden shows, as well as the 2 shows in Passaic, New Jersey. And I think 905 was. I guess he played bass on it.
I guess I'll have to look in my Who concert file to find out for sure.
Yeah, and there were pictures. There was a picture in Melody Maker or NME at the time when they were playing 905 in 1979, and Pete was playing one of John's standard size Olympics. And I thought that's a rarity to see 2 people of the Who playing bass.
I've seen that picture before.
Yeah,
and I have been in contact with Mark before. I think when Hits 50 was going around and Periscope was big. People were periscoping all those shows. I know that
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, me and him were in a bunch of the same chat rooms while talking and watching those shows.
Mm-hmm.
I know I have a couple questions. Tom, did you have anything to ask while we're here? No? Okay.
Sorry. It's cutting in and out sometimes for me.
I just want to give you a chance to ask a question before I head on.
I was just looking at the list of questions we had come up with before. We covered a lot of it. One of the things I thought, and you guys might not be able to hear me right now.
We can.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You have the video froze up. 2 questions that I thought were still interesting we haven't kind of touched on yet was there any missing information that you haven't found or didn't get to find or are still looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question, because anybody that knows me, that knows of my interest in the Who, to this day, I am still bothered by the fact that the fourth trip they made to America in 1967 was when the Who Sellout came out, and I Can See for Miles was in the single at the time. And it bothers me that in the last week of November, the first couple of days of December, they were ending this little 3-week tour in the New York area, and we found 2 gigs, and to this day I have not found. There's probably 2 or 3 other gigs from that week, and I don't know where they played. They literally fell off the end of the earth. All the normal places that they were booked by Premier Talent of New York, and they had a big roster of English bands. They always did. Premier Talent booked the Yardbirds, Spencer Davis Group, Procol Harum, Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix, Herman's Hermits, all these different bands. Normally the places that, for example, the Yardbirds would play, the Who did not play. And I'm thinking, okay, well, where did they go in that the last few days of November 67 and the first couple of days? We've got 2 gigs, and you can assume that, like you were saying before about a puzzle, that particular week is obviously a 7-piece puzzle. We've got 2 pieces and the other 5 are not there. And it still bothers me to this day. That may be sort of a completist, but I don't know.
Maybe the wonders of the internet can help us out now, and maybe people.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would still like to find them. There's got to be 2 or 3 other gigs,
Yeah, I can only imagine. That's and it's crazy that something can disappear like that. But
yeah. I mean, all the normal channels. You can research newspaper websites these days online. You can look up all sorts of things, yearbooks, what have you, underground newspapers, student newspapers, and they just don't appear in any of them. And I'm thinking, well, they must have played somewhere. For one thing, my theory was always that, okay, they're ending up in New York. Well, for one thing, they're here to promote an album and a single. So you can't be sitting around. You have to be working. Secondly, they're sitting around New York. Well, that's a little bit too expensive to be sitting around doing nothing and not playing any gigs.
Yeah.
So for those reasons,
Oh, no doubt. What was there anything that was like really surprising from writing this and, compiling all this information? Was there something you were just like, man, I had no idea that this happened? Or
yeah, there were probably a couple of things that came along. I'm trying to think of what they might be right now.
Yeah, that's a tough question right off the bat.
Well, no, it's a good question, but I just think, maybe, geez, I'm trying to think of something offhand. I think the way they were, well, one thing that kind of surprised me, and I was seeing it at the time, that they were starting to play shows again in 1979. This is less than a year after Mooney passed away. And I thought, okay, well, they rebounded so quickly. But then, of course, Cincinnati happened. And between Mooney's death in September 78 and then Cincinnati in December 79, I thought, well, how many hits to the body can a band take? And yet they were able to continue. I'll have to say one thing is that someone pointed this out to me. I think it would have been wise to devote more than just 1 or 2 paragraphs to the events of Cincinnati. I mean, I should have expounded on what happened and why. But at the time, the investigation, I think, was still ongoing, or their depositions hadn't been, maybe they had been given by then. But anyway, whatever the technical circumstances were, I just thought, yeah, we probably should have expanded on it rather than just, a couple of lines. I think at the time I was thinking, I don't want to hit this one too hard.
Yeah, no, it's a sensitive subject, and it is still is for the band.
Actually, yeah, it was like one of my biggest notes here that I was going to come to at the end is, right there, why so small entry for Cincinnati. And, it just reminds me that one of these last shows that they had to cancel was their like almost quote unquote homecoming show for Cincinnati, in the 2020.
Yeah.
COVID lockdown. And, I was tweeting when I found out that happened, as like, I don't need to see another Who concert as long as I live. If this pandemic takes it out, I've seen the band 30 or 40 times, I'll be satisfied. But I would give anything for them to go back there and play. It's the last time they've been trying to play there. So hopefully,
Yeah. And they were legally banned from playing there as well. They I think it was either the city of Cincinnati, or I'm not sure what county that's in, banned them from playing there, which is why in 1980 they played Lexington, Kentucky. And in 82 they played Louisville, Kentucky.
Right. Which
is as close as they could get.
Yeah.
But I think for healing purposes for everybody, for them too, they want to go back there.
No, and I mean, you've seen the interviews where Pete said, he goes, we should have stayed. We should have said something. We should have done more. But I think, for one, they're on tour, so they had this momentum mode. Secondly, if they said something, it may have been taken wrong. I'm not sure, but they had to play the next night, which is, Tom mentioned something about, things that surprise you. The way they were able to go out and play the next night, I just can't imagine the feeling they had,
Oh yeah, no, I can't imagine anything.
Well, and overwhelming.
Rumors are rumors, but I think at the time they were all on some kind of we have to keep going because we're a shark, and if we're a shark, and if we stop for any reason, Yeah,
it was. I think they had the momentum of being on tour, and then they thought, if we don't play tomorrow, then we won't play again.
I think the band has always been very mindful that there's more going on than just playing music for people. There's so many people behind the scenes that rely on a paycheck and stuff like that. The riggers and the stage hands and all that stuff too. I think that's something they've always been mindful of.
Yeah, I think so. It's like when John passed away, they thought, should we cancel the entire tour? And there's probably upwards of 100 people immediately with the Who's organization that do that for a living. Yeah. And you just can't pull the rug out from underneath them. Although, that was, again, how many hits can a band sustain and keep going,
Yeah. Was there anybody throughout this process that you talked to that you were just like, I can't believe I'm talking to this person? I mean, obviously John and that kind of stuff, but I mean, for somebody who plays guitar or something, like I look at Bobby Pridden or
Alan Rogan.
Alan
Rogan.
Alan Rogan, that's what I meant. Sorry. Yeah. Alan Rogan. Like that's like,
I never met Alan Rogan, but I did meet Bob Pridden one time at one of John's solo shows in 1988, I think it was. He played a place called the Country Club in Reseda, California, the San Fernando Valley. And I think it was an old bank building or something and converted into a rock club. And I went up there and I said, and hello. And this is still while I was doing research on the Who, and I was keeping track of John's gigs as well. And he was very nice, but he was busy, setting up or tearing down the gear. So I didn't really get a chance. Probably, of course, meeting John. I gave you a little story before about meeting Pete in early 1980 when I had just moved to LA. I couldn't get a hold of John, and I felt really frustrated, down in the dumps that I couldn't get a hold of John. And then when our good friend Jerry Hauser said, hold on to your hat, Pete's there too. And then we played phone tag, and it was February 16th, I think it was, of 1980. I finally got a hold of Pete, and he called me back, and I called him, and I called him at the studio. He was at Warner Brothers recording studio in Burbank. And he goes, well, I'm still doing vocals at the moment. He goes, why don't you just come on up? And I'm thinking, how many people of his stature, meaning, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Keith Richard at the time, George Harrison or John Lennon, how many people of his stature would invite an unknown stranger, obviously an unknown stranger, a stranger, to watch him record in a private setting like that? I mean, if I'd walked in there with 30 people, he wouldn't have known that I was bringing him. I went by myself. anyway, I went up to watch him record, and I couldn't believe I was sitting there for 5 hours watching him record demos. The song I saw him do a guitar track to, he recorded guitar and vocals to a song called What Is Love, which is on the internet now, but was unreleased for a long time. I guess the Who didn't think it was good for the Face Dances album. And but I saw him do a guitar solo to it, and it was simply unbelievable to watch him record.
Yeah, 'cause that's, I mean, something I think about is like, this is a passion project of yours.
Yes.
You have no thought of ever doing anything with this information other than just collecting it. And it's like how it opened up doors for you that, you didn't know, it's just like, if Ethan and I ever got to talk to anybody in the Who's inner circle, we'd lose our minds. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Oh yeah. I was
Shaky.
Sometimes I would think, who am I to be sitting with these people? I'm just a Who fan, but then working on the book, I guess, did get my name to some other people. But again, sometimes I would have, for example, I was having lunch in London with Chris Charlesworth and Richard Evans, who designed my book. Of course.
Those are Who luminaries. I'm reading a letter that Irish Jack wrote me. You're talking about Charlesworth and Evans, who I've got posters of behind. Anyway.
Yeah.
Good.
And I'm sitting here having lunch with them, and I'm just like, who am I to be having lunch with these guys? These guys are in with these people. They're very well connected people, But you try to let that fade away and just absorb the conversation and enjoy the moment, is what it was.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to talk to Roger at all about the book?
No, but interestingly enough, Irish Jack came out to LA one time. He'd never been to California. So this is probably in 1995 or something, 96. So he came out, and we were sitting at the kitchen table working on something, notepads, legal pads. And he goes, I know who might know this. And he was calling his wife back in Ireland every couple of days just to, tell her what was going on. Anyway, he calls. He goes, hello? He goes, yeah. He goes, yeah, I'm at Joe McMichael's house. He goes, I got a question for you, yada, yada. And it was something way back, some university gig or something. And he goes, oh, hang on, somebody wants to say hello. And I said, who did you call? He goes, Roger. So he hands me the phone, and I'm talking to Roger on my payphone, my home phone in Los Angeles. And he goes, oh, hello, Joe, how are you? I said, oh, fine. He goes, are you taking care of our boy out there? I said, oh, yeah. I said, my girlfriend was making homemade stew or something that night. He goes, oh, it sounds great. I said, well, you can come out too if you like. He goes, I might do that. And we just, it was very nice, but I was just, wow, talking to Roger Daltrey. Interesting,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You've been so generous with your time. I just have one entry I want to point out because
Of course.
it means so much to me. And we weren't going to do too many entries because it's a lot. But Sunday, December 23rd, Sundown Theater, Edmonton, North London.
Yes.
This was the first time I ever got a bootleg that I was very satisfied with.
Oh, okay.
And so I just want to thank you for this retelling of this glorious show.
You are most welcome.
This chalice of Edmonton Sundown, 1970. It must have been 1973. A beautiful concert, and I assume there was a lot of listening to bootlegs to get exact things down.
Yeah, I know. Like again, if I mention my friend Jerry Hauser, who was an avid collector. Every audio recording he could get his hands on was in his collection. And he had some boots. I would try to listen to them, but obviously you know this as well. Cassette recordings left a lot to be desired. And sometimes they were literally unlistenable. You would try to hear what was going on. And if you really couldn't tell the song, I didn't feel so inclined to want to have tons and tons of cassettes that I really couldn't discern what was going on, which is where I always gravitated towards paper material to see where they played rather than, the audio recordings did confirm things. I remember one particular cassette I used to have from Rome. They played Rome in the last gig of the tour in 72, the European tour. But it was so, I don't know what generation tape it was, but it was hard to listen to. But certain things, yeah, did come out. Oh, they only played that song 2 shows of that tour. Things like that would come up, and that was cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
I've got one more question.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, this is obviously a passion project for a long time before it came to fruition as being a book.
Correct.
Have you continued following the Who in this manner, or after the book, you're like, I'm done? Like,
it's funny, you know, for when I first finished it, of course, you want to kind of just step away from the table.
yeah.
But again, later on, I did pick up some things here and there. You would find out information. Like I mentioned before, you know, I'm still frustrated by not being able to find all the gigs they played in America. That was my part of the responsibility of research with Irish Jack. And, you know, to not find, I think there's a gig in Pennsylvania from that tour, but I'm not sure. Something like that was frustrating, but I continued to look into it. And then my friend I mentioned before, who had written an excellent book on the Kinks, a guy named Doug Hinman, a book called All Day and All of the Night. If you want to know anything about the Kinks, that is the book to have.
Right on.
We were thinking about doing a Yardbirds book because the research gets in your DNA and you feel intrigued to find out, you know.
Yeah.
We supplied the research for dates on a book about Jeff Beck and then a couple of other books about the Yardbirds. So we got credit, but not as authors. With the Who, though, yeah, I did keep up, and not so much of what's going on these days, but, you know, for example, you'll find out something about a gig in 1968. I don't think there'll be any updates. It's been a long while, you know, since Concert File came out, but it's still just for my own personal satisfaction. I like to keep up with it. Yeah.
No doubt.
Well, that kind of answered my very final question, because as I said before, this book ends when the Quadrophenia tour is going back to the United States and North America in 1997. And I've documented it I've seen 30 or 40 shows, and none of them are in the book. And I need a volume 2.
Oh,
I need a volume 2 so bad.
Yeah, I'd have to bring that up with the publisher.
Because here's the deal. I know there's different things that happen. I went to like 5 or 6 shows on the Wire and Glass tour, Endless Wire tour, and there was some weird stuff that happened at the beginning that didn't happen all the way through. The mini opera, they added songs and they took them away all the time. There's all sorts of weird stuff. It's not all I can't explain. It won't get fooled again. There's some stuff that happened in there, and I feel like it should be down on paper. Here are the songs. There's some songs I never thought I'd get to hear that I've heard way past this. I never thought I'd hear a quick one while he's away live, but I did. I never thought I'd hear Slip Kid live, but I did. You know, there's lots of information that could come out with number 2.
I do believe too, you know, the Who or the Rolling Stones or Paul McCartney, anybody of that generation, you know, looking at their catalog and saying, well, geez, you know, I've never played this before. I think they all had a re-examination of their work and said, you know, maybe I should play that song. You know, I mean, McCartney being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, you know, I mean, anything performed from Sgt. Pepper would be kind of strange. And I'm sure that Pete and Roger felt the same way. Oh, well, here's an album track. You know, we should have played that. Well, let's play it now, you know. And that is interesting that they would go back and re-examine their own catalog.
Yeah.
I took my son, I had a life, I've talked about it here a million times. I had a life cycle moment 2 years ago. I was able to take him to see The Who in Virginia.
Oh, wow.
On my 40th birthday.
Oh, that's very cool.
And he was 7 at the time, and his middle name is Townsend. And yeah, and I got to take him to see The Who, you know, and he loved cool. Tommy, and they opened with Tommy. But unfortunately, in the middle there, great for me, horrible for a 7-year-old. He's cuddling there in the snow and the storm, and they're playing Imagine a Man, you know, because they have an orchestra. And I'm like, this is great for Daddy. But the whole thing was amazing. By the time they did Baba O'Reilly with Katie Jacoby, he loved it. It was a great moment. I just think there's lots of stuff there and easier to research these days too.
Oh, much easier. Yeah. That reminds me, if I may, a friend of mine in California saw The Who a lot of times. In the 60s, he saw him at the Shrine Auditorium opening the 68 tour.
Yeah.
And then he saw them Anaheim Stadium 1970, the Forum in 1971. He took his son to see the Who at the Hollywood Bowl. He and his wife and 2 kids went to go see the Who at the Hollywood Bowl. And his son was so into it, very well versed in music way before his time. He said, he goes, oh, Dad, they're going to play such and such. Roger's putting on a guitar. He was that knowledgeable. And I thought that was very cool. And the Hollywood Bowl is where my friend Jeff had seen the Who in 1967, opening for the association.
Oh, yeah.
And he has 8mm silent color film of that, which I have seen.
Oh, nice. Well, we got to get some of that out too. The Who concert.
Yeah,
the video one.
I keep telling him, man, I said, get it transferred.
I mean, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you'd love to come on again just to talk about Who stuff, not necessarily the book, would love to have you on.
Yeah, let's do that. We'll do that sometime.
Especially with this new stuff coming. I don't know if you've seen them lately, but hopefully they'll go back out again. Roger's supposed to go out again. There's rumblings of some kind of Pete solo thing happening. You never know. Our hopes are always high here at Fisher Protocol headquarters for new Who stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, very good. Thanks for carrying on the banner here. It's funny about Pete playing solo. I never thought he would play solo in America back in the 1980s. I thought, no, if he does the occasional one-off show in London or somewhere. And a friend of mine said, he goes, hey, Pete's playing a couple of solo shows. Do you want to come over? I said, sure. So I flew over there in 1985 to see the 2 Deep End shows at the Brixton Academy.
Oh,
and I was front row. I was leaning on the rail. It was simply amazing.
Yeah, I'll tell you what dorks we are. One time I sent Tom a copy of it. I was like, watch the video of this. I don't think Gilmore was in step with Townsend right here for this whole song. I think they cut out the sound on the Rock Palast. Didn't I send that to you one day? Like, just to let you know how deep we get into it together.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. I said we're examining the Who very closely here. So
yeah. We are.
It's a good thing.
It is a good thing. And talk about Pete. That 1996 Fillmore West show.
Fillmore Auditorium, actually.
Yeah, it was a Fillmore Auditorium.
I was there.
Both nights. Or was it one night?
I think it was one night, and it was a good weekend because I saw Ray Davies solo.
Nice.
The next night. It
was Pete and John Caron.
Yes.
And you were at that show?
Yes.
Literally my all-time favorite Pete Townsend CD.
It was, and then Ray was equally as good the next night.
Yeah. And I got the Eel Pie recording of it, and they played it on the radio, and it's one of my things of all time.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
But
I'm actually working on a secret project on that one for myself that I probably can't publish, but I'll send that to you later.
Okay,
we don't talk about that here.
Yeah.
Joe, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. It was a pleasure, and we'll do it again sometime.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Have a good day then, guys.